So is fall about done up there, Don?
Is what about done?
Are the trees about done? It's been spectacular.
Yeah, they're actually getting pretty nice right now. The leaves are falling, but we had a little sunshine today and they're really looking pretty.
Yeah, it's like, you know, the arts and crafts festivals here in Northwest Arkansas, third weekend in October. That was always the peak forever. I mean, going back 4, 5, 6 decades, you know, at a minimum, that's why they picked that weekend.
Right.
And in about the past 10 years, we've been noticing that it's just been getting a little bit later, a little bit later. And here we are, you know, the second week of November, and it's just now really turned on in the last couple of days.
Yeah, that's about what we're seeing as well.
Yeah. And the oaks are just brown. A lot of trees are still green, weirdly. They haven't turned brown yet.
It seems like the last few years it's kind of gone from green straight to brown, but this year
or bare, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is the first year. John Johnson, I don't know, do you know John from Omaha, Nebraska Star Party? He was down today, and he said this is the first time in at least 3 or 4 years they have a condo here in Northwest Arkansas. And he said it's the first time in a while that the trees have been pretty, you know, coming down. So it's nice to have a fall again. So Don, do you know Scott?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I was kidding him a while ago. I have your hat out in my truck. It's a little flat looking, so I said I could go get your hat.
Is it that red one?
That's because before I gave it to him, I ran over it with the steamroller. You know.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit closer to I don't know. It's more like a salmon-y color. It's not exactly red, but it's fine. It's good. I keep it in my truck, and I guess it just gets stuff put on or whatever else all the time.
It's your emergency cap.
There you go.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we have right now we have Richard Grace and Harold Locke, Mike Wiesner is watching. Yeah, I can never tell who's not chatting that watches.
Yeah, if you're watching, say something in the chat so we can give you a shout out.
A lot of people chime in, you know, when we mention that. There's a lot of people who watch, you know, of course, Cloudy Nights gets a tremendous amount of traffic on their site. Right. And we're on the homepage of that site. George Trulius, I think is his last name, says hello from Cyprus and the Zytion Planetarium and Observatory. That's very cool. Oh, the Kytion. Kytion. Cyprus. That's awesome.
Yeah, Don, we have a global audience. We'll have.
That's great.
Earth is our perfect and irreplaceable home. But space can be a dangerous place. Living close to an active star in a solar system with asteroids and visiting comets means we need to keep an eye on the sky. The satellites we need for everyday life face a variety of threats, including from space debris left over from previous decades of space activities. ESA is working to reduce and prevent the effects of hazards from space. We want to protect our pale blue dot, the people living there, and the satellites around us that we need every day. We want to use space safely and be prepared for threats from above. The Sun is a lively and active place, as the Solar Orbiter mission is helping to show. Without the Sun's energy, we would not exist. But when solar flares erupt, or when the Sun ejects clouds of matter in our direction, our satellites in space and our power grids and networks on the ground can be at risk. The Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere do a great job of keeping us safe down here. We can even enjoy space weather as the beautiful auroras we see in Earth's polar regions. But we need to be prepared for harmful solar storms. Solar storms can damage satellites and affect electricity grids and other vital networks on the ground. Aircraft that normally fly in polar regions need to change their routes when solar radiation levels get too high. While we continue to learn about our active sun, we are also watching it carefully. It can send the streams of particles, highly energetic atoms of hydrogen, and radiation in our direction. Working with our partners around the world, ESA is developing new ways of monitoring space weather and helping develop the technology we rely on in space and on the ground to stay safe. For this purpose, ESA will develop the first operational deep space mission to give us a close to live view of the solar disk from a unique viewpoint. The spacecraft will be stationed 150 million kilometers away from Earth at one of the Lagrange points, where the gravitational influence of the Sun and Earth are in balance. We will watch active regions on the Sun and spot mass ejection before they reach Earth, enabling a new early warning system. When we look at the Moon or Mars, we see hundreds of impact craters. Those craters exist on Earth too, but volcanic activity, oceans, and vegetation can quickly cover them up. Our atmosphere helps protect us from meteors, slowing them down or making them burn up completely. But we know that our planet can be struck by bigger objects from space. We believe it was an asteroid that changed the dinosaurs' world forever. Luckily for us, we have ways of watching the skies that the dinosaurs didn't. ESA's telescopes work with those of other countries to watch for asteroids and map their orbits. When we find an asteroid that has any chance of hitting Earth, we connect all of the information we can about its orbit and what it is made from. Once our team is satisfied that it will not be dangerous, they can remove it from the risk list. When it's needed, we work with the UN and international partners to assess and warn of any possibility of impact.
Jeez.
ESA is building a new fly-eye telescope that will automate the search process. We can see more of the sky each night and get better at detecting objects that might come too close. In the future, we could take action if an asteroid is headed our way. To learn how to deflect asteroids, ESA's HERA mission will visit the Didymos asteroid after NASA's DART mission. Information from the two missions could tell us how we might change an asteroid's orbit and push it out of the way. A small change in an asteroid's path could make all the difference. Space is getting busier. There are thousands of active satellites, with more being launched all the time. There is a growing risk that they will get too close to each other. ESA satellites are flown by experts who work around the clock to keep everything running smoothly. But as more satellites are launched, the orbital pathways are getting more congested. ESA is working on putting automatic processes in place to support the management of space traffic. We're working on making space traffic management quicker and easier to reduce risk to any of our European satellites and sustain the precious resource of space for the next generation. As spaceflight has become more common, Earth's orbital paths have become polluted with space junk. Earth orbit is a limited natural resource, and we need to protect it. ESA, other agencies and private companies that fly satellites are working to reduce space debris. International awareness has changed since the early days of the space age, so now satellite operators must make a plan to dispose of hardware responsibly when it reaches the end of its life. But even if everyone stopped adding to the space junk, there are abandoned satellites and used-up rocket bodies still circulating in Earth's orbit. A collision would not only damage a working satellite, but also create more debris that could cause more damage. To prevent a chain reaction of collisions that could make space too polluted to use, we need to bring some of those derelict satellites down so that they can safely burn up in the atmosphere. ESA has been working on different ideas for capturing space junk and taking it out of orbit. We are developing the world's first commercial mission that will grab a piece of space junk and deorbit it. By removing dead satellites or finding new ways of repurposing them in space, we will reduce the space debris problem and create new business opportunities. We want spaceflight to be sustainable and orbits to be available for everyone to use. What goes up must come down safely.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Scott Roberts of Explore Scientific and the Explore Alliance, and we're sitting here chatting with George Trulius at the in Cyprus at the. I hope I'm getting this name right. It's the
Kition.
Planetarian Observatory over there, and so. And perhaps George may join us, for one of our programs in the future. It's a great pleasure also to see the rest of you online. We've got Richard Grace, Mike Wiesner, Harold Locke, and who else is with us today? I think we're missing Beatrice. Normally she logs on by now.
Pekka's not with us.
Pekka, they must be sleeping after the star party last night. Norm Hughes, Norm, good to see you here. And Beatrice is right there. There she is. And anyways, and for all of you that are not chatting with us, a great big howdy to you. This is the 58th episode of FirstLight Chronicles, and our special guest is Don Ficken. Don is the president of the International Dark Sky Association Missouri chapter. And so Kent has been doing an ongoing, on his ongoing crusade to help protect dark skies, to bring awareness to the importance of dark skies. He's brought on a couple of people, and it's always great to have people from IDA on our program. So thank you, Don, for coming on. And I'm going to turn this over to you, Kent, and you can give a proper introduction to Don.
Well, I was going to let Don give a proper introduction to himself because he is lives in St. Louis, been active in the St. Louis Astronomy Club. I think he said since 2008, the St. Louis Astronomical Society, and through that we have a couple of mutual friends. Don, take it away. You're going to be talking about, I think the discussion was successes and coalitions and just sort of what's going on in Missouri. So go ahead and jump in with both feet.
I appreciate that. Thanks. So my understanding is that you guys have already covered a lot about the basics of light pollution. So I will focus, at least from my perspective, on some of the things that we're trying to do in our Missouri chapter. And we obviously have a few challenges as we try to spread the word across the whole state of Missouri and other places. So I know that you guys are familiar with the IDA in general. It was established in 1988. And probably the keystone programs are these, where this International Dark Sky Places program, where you have everything from international dark sky reserves, sanctuaries to parks, communities, and even something called urban night sky places. And that's something that is our chapter, obviously is very interested in trying to get international dark sky parks and urban night sky places particularly done. So I want to just quickly a real shout out because IDA has a conference called Under One Sky. It'll be actually starting next couple of days, November 12th to 13th. It's free to attend. It's a virtual worldwide event. And my understanding is that they have a lot of people already registered to attend. And it's a 2-day conference. If you just go to darksky.org, you can learn more about how to participate by free. I certainly will be there. They'll have some great speakers and a great chance to learn more about the topic that we'll talk about tonight. All right, so in 2018, actually just prior to October, I heard Bruce McMath from Arkansas talk about an International Dark Sky Association, and he was talking about Arkansas, and he scolded a bunch of us that were there from amateur astronomers at a regional meeting that we didn't have a state chapter in Missouri. And I said, well, that's a big surprise to me. I just thought we'd have one, and I'm new to astronomy, so to speak. So maybe I should take a look into it. So we basically formed one at Bruce's urging. A little different than normal with IDA. IDA often has more like a city chapter or a small regional chapter. We did a statewide chapter. That's a very big ask if you think about that. So one of the things that we did early on was decide to divide our state into zones, basically 6 zones. And we're trying to make sure that we have board members and assets and programming and all those things stressed throughout the state. Otherwise, it could become a St. Louis chapter, which is where I'm from. So I want to make sure that we do it the proper justice. I think it's really good to give some context about myself. I was a business guy. If you ask me if I saw Halley's Comet, nope, I didn't even think about it, wasn't worried about it. It wasn't until 2008 that I started taking a look at astronomy. I bought my first telescope, a Celestron. 2015, when the eclipse started coming closer, I said, well, maybe I need to learn about looking at the sun. So I bought a Lunt telescope. And of course, like all astronomers, you get aperture fever. I found this 17-incher Coulter on Facebook and bought that. And then most recently, I'm into the imaging thing, which is starting to get in. So I'm not experienced like many of you might be that have been around a long time, but what it's done is just build a little foundation of knowledge for me to understand maybe what I'm expecting to see in the night and what light pollution might be doing for that. So, and this is, you're going to hear as I talk about tonight is when you start with a chapter in a state and you have almost nobody, it turned out that when I started the Missouri chapter, I thought I would have like hundreds of people already part of IDA, and I just assembled them to a chapter. Turned out we had 6 members, the entire state. I go, wow, I didn't realize that at all. So if I reach back into my history, after I got involved with the IDA, with the Astronomy Society in 2008, I learned about a program called the Library Telescope Program in 2014. It was created by the New Hampshire Astronomical Society. I thought that was a great idea. It's where you basically could check out a telescope from a book, like a book from a library. I thought it was really terrific. So we launched one in 2014 in St. Louis, and it's really quickly rocketed up. We have over 179 telescopes and 40 plus libraries. You can see a picture of just one shipment, those boxes down there on the left-hand side, one shipment of library telescopes. It was a way that I started really building connections throughout the region. We actually became, well, internationally known for some of this. I think it's probably the biggest city in the world as far as the library telescope program. There's bigger programs statewide, but we have a large presence. The other thing that I did is I launched, and this is because I started learning about eclipses, thing called the St. Louis Eclipse Task Force. This is getting ready for the 2017 eclipse. I grew that organization to something like 160 organizations, 300 people. We worked with libraries, schools, government, businesses. We did a large expo and did something like 500,000 glasses. And the only reason that I'm telling you this stuff is because what I did is I started building relationships through the connections of the library telescope and the St. Louis Task Force and just a basic level of knowledge. I've also kind of moved this a little above that because I started dealing with some folks out in New York that they had a Facebook page. And so we created a librarytelescope.org website that now is tracking. We're trying to basically find out wherever, every location that there's just a library telescope. And you can imagine when you go to a library, when you're trying to look at the sky, you have all this light pollution. It's a great opportunity to talk about light pollution. So we started assembling, we've got over 600 locations. And quite honestly, we moved to we've got something like 40 clubs that are participating in a monthly meeting on sharing best practice and growing. And we've tracked organizations in Canada, and we're dealing with people in the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. So we're really doing the best job we can. And that's a librarytelescope.org. I encourage you to check it out. It's a very cool thing. You can click on any state or any location. You can literally get a list of known locations for the library telescope. And then this will be the last, I think, as far as
what was that URL again?
It's librarytelescope.org.
So Scott can, there it is. So Scott can put it in the chat.
So another thing we did, which is maybe interesting to the birders involved in this group at different times, is that, and this is actually a program we created here in St. Louis. We worked with the St. Louis Audubon Society. The idea was, and I saw this as we were dealing with libraries, we might have 100 people and 5 telescopes, and there's big lines. So I'm saying, why don't we find something for them to do while they're in line? In other words, they can look at the sky through binoculars. And so then I thought further. I said, well, what if we took the idea of binoculars looking at the sky? What about the daytime? Could they use them in the daytime? So we partnered with the St. Louis Audubon Society. We found a really great pair of 8x42 binoculars, and we put them in a little patchy case with some brochures and made those available for checkout. And those just rocketed. I mean, it was amazing how quickly that we had 100 binoculars purchased by libraries really quickly, and they're beginning to be adopted by other regions. So the combination of the telescope and the binocular program is a really great way to embed ourselves into libraries who have great marketing tools. They have lots of stuff going on. They're very good marketing. They have great bases to deal with. And so when I'm in a little chapter like an IDA, if I can leverage that in some way, that really is going to help me. So I know you guys have seen this before, but I think it's worth going through again. So a few years ago, there was some research done. Basically, they made a map of the US, well, actually the world, I guess, but basically this is a map of the USA that shows the light pollution in color codes, where black is obviously dark, and then you go all the way up to red, white, and almost a little, I guess, pinkish or purplish. And this is what in late 1950, they saw as basically in our St. Louis and Kansas City area are highlighted right there in those boxes. And then in 1970s, middle 1970s, this is what it looked like based on this little color coding chart. And again, there's St. Louis and Kansas City. And then 1997, you can see how quickly this is brightening up. And this is like, wow, this is really getting bright. You're starting to see things really happen. And of course, St. Louis and Kansas City once again. And this is what they're looking at in 2025. And you can start seeing almost no black places in the East Coast at all. And you're still seeing a few remnants of black or darker places, in other words, less light polluted places in the West Coast, but things are going away very quickly. Now, when I look at our state of Missouri as a chapter, I go, wow. First off, we got some big cities going on, right? St. Louis on the right-hand side, Kansas City on the left, Jefferson City, which is our state capital in the middle. And then you've got Springfield, I think is down the bottom, but you do have a few pockets left of darkness.
Hey, Don,
Yes.
I use Springfield, which is in that bottom circle, a town of 325,000 people, when I give my dark sky light pollution. And then I show how much light pollution there is in Branson, which is just on the bottom of that circle, a town of 2,200 people. Generally, this is a population map for intents and purposes.
Yeah, it's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But Branson is the outlier because it's a small town, but it has a light footprint, half to a third as large as Branson, but Branson is 100 times bigger, so it's the contrast there is always unique and interesting, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the urban areas is exactly when I'm coming up to the same conclusion too. So I'd love to have a dark sky place, and those boxes where we show the blue boxes are actually dark enough to be qualified to be a dark sky place, international dark sky place. In other words, they're physically dark enough. The trouble is that the urban areas are brightening up so much, they're reaching out into the darkest areas of our state. And unless we stop that, unless we slow that down, I don't care what we try to do in terms of an international dark sky place, it won't stay there. All right, so there's been a couple things that we've done. Actually, I can't claim too much credit for this one. There was a Truman State University professor that had already launched a meteor, sky quality meteor program. The idea is to take a meteor. You can see these little boxes there in a little canister. They measure light, sky brightness 24/7. And we've settled on every 5 minutes. And so you can literally get the data, you can chart that, you can see what the changes are over time. The trouble is he'd only had a couple locations started. And when IDA formed and I learned about him, what we did is we partnered and we put in now, I think we have 17 locations throughout the state of Missouri. And importantly, we partnered with the Gateway Arch, which has been an important partner with us. And we've really been trying to gather the data. It's not just about the data though, but it's also by the fact that when you go into a small town and you go into a area and you want that organization to monitor this meter, collect the data, they're starting to get some ownership in this. In other words, they have to go do something and they're very interested in what the results are. So you're starting to build relationships and partnerships. And that's been an important part. So we've had that program going on since literally our chapter started. Another thing that this is leveraging my contacts with the library system, we launched through an organization called SciStarter. which is a very well-known organization with some 3,000 projects, we created some special projects around the night sky and life on Earth. As you know, night sky is obviously what we think about as astronomers, but the life on Earth is definitely impacted by light pollution. So we built a series of programs that you can go to darksky.scystarter.org, and you can launch those as a library for free. And if you want some of the tools, you can buy the tools, and you can make those all available for checkout. We've done this successfully in St. Louis with some libraries, and even the Girl Scouts have gotten involved a little bit. Unfortunately, about the time we rolled this out initially, COVID hit, but that's starting to resurge right now. We're starting to get a lot more interest in getting back into that. They love those checkout programs that you can do that are basically built, in this case, on iPhones and Android devices and those type of things. So this was a big one. When I worked with the Audubon Society to get the binoculars set up, I started realizing that light pollution has a lot of impact on birds. And to give you an example, whenever birds migrate in the spring, they go through what's called, for our area, they go up to the Mississippi Flyway. They fly up through St. Louis and up through Chicago and then back down in the fall, September plus. It turns out that a study that was done ranked St. Louis number 5th in deadliest bird strikes. They hit buildings, literally get confusion, hit buildings and die for spring fall migration, and 6 for fall. And Kansas City was number 7 and 8, with Chicago being number 1 in both. And so we're saying, wow, there's a lot of interest. There should be a lot of interest in birding organizations and conservation groups about basically preventing light pollution so that we can have a safer passage. So we have built this coalition. It's actually from Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri, and we're adding more on. We've got the St. Louis Zoo, the Gateway Arch, the St. Louis Audubon Society. We've got several people in Kansas City. And we're building this over time. It's a fairly new collaboration. The whole point is to work together every couple of months and find out what we can do to spread the word, and also register buildings to turn their lights out during specific times of the year, particularly May and September. So the Gateway Arch, for example, actually turns off their lights in the month of May and September for a few weeks each year. So it helps actually be safer for the birds to travel. So this is one example where what we're doing is we're taking a small group like IDA, working with a large group like the Audubon Society, who, by the way, worked to get the St. Louis area to do a resolution, and they've done a lot of things across the state where IDA is not really having to be that much involved, other than just hosting this lightsoutheartland website. And they're doing a lot of great work, and we're supporting them, and it's been a great partnership for us. Another thing that we just finished up actually was a conference. We put together a conference of something like 16 speakers, 16 exhibitors, and it was certainly amateur astronomers were there, but it was also things like the Missouri Prairie Foundation, the Missouri Department of Conservation, the Missouri State Parks, lots of different conservation groups. And what was the interesting take on this? This was done in Springfield, Missouri, October 3rd and 4th. What was interesting is that the organization's feedback was, wow, we get together as individual groups every so often, but we don't get together as bunches of conservation groups. And so IDA actually spans so many different ways. It's not just stars, it's not just birds, it's all these things. And we're kind of a group that can bring it all together. And so they got to get together in Springfield and meet with each other and talk with each other. Now, a lot of them were on Zoom. We made that an option, and we had a pretty good attendance on Zoom as well. But it was a nice way to get introduced the idea of light pollution and how conservation and light pollution all work together. So this is a fun project we're actually just finishing up right now. We have a filmmaker member in Kansas City, and we have a professor in Truman State University in Kirksville. We collaborated with them. This filmmaker is really good at making 360-degree virtual reality films. So he had this idea, why don't we make a film of the Gateway Arch with the professor standing there, and let's film him talking about the sky behind them. But what we're going to do is we're going to teach the Bortle scale. We're going to take it all the way back. Now, the Bortle scale is a very astronomish way to talk about how dark the skies are or how light polluted the skies are. Let's put him in front of the arch and take him all the way back and pretend like there's no light pollution. What can you see? What's the Milky Way look like at that time? And then begin raising the level of light pollution. It's an 8-minute film. You can literally get on VR glasses. It's very, very cool. And you can, as he's talking, you can look around the whole sky or the whole St. Louis landscape, and he'll take you through basically how it works. And so that's on darkskymissouri.org/VR film. And we've had that actually debuted at the Gateway Arch, which is a gateway. They have lots of members. So in other words, partner with an arch that already has a wonderful following to begin with. And that's a really good way for us to leverage what we're doing and get them out, our word out on light pollution. So one of our first successes in our chapter is there's a category called urban night sky place. So if you think about an international dark sky place, that you think about the Grand Canyon, all that, those have some wonderful, beautiful skies, but it's not realistic to have an urban park meet that criteria ever. So some of the very same things that you would think about as a dark sky place, in other words, you have to have outreach, lighting inventories, all that kind of stuff, we still have to do, but what we don't have to do is meet a particular criteria for darkness. But what's the interesting thing about that is that if we take a city like St. Louis or any city throughout the state, and we start doing programs in the parks talking about light pollution, and we bring the public in, they start learning about this, whether it's their interests in stars or their interests in life on Earth or whatever else, they're going to start thinking about that. And that starts building the support that we need as a state to really begin maybe making change, maybe getting some laws or legislation passed or whatever else. So our very first one was Olivet. It took us about a little over a year to get that done. They're a relatively small park, 35 acres, no lights. And we've had a program just recently, had 60 people show up. They just loved it. It was just a really great chance to talk about what we're really trying to do. So we talked about international dark sky parks, and I want to focus just a little bit more on the urban night sky places. As a chapter, we've decided that that's where we can make some of the biggest impact, because if we work on urban night sky places and we can get the public to go to a park, and again, there's over 1,000 cities in the state of Missouri, and you've got all these requirements of inventory, measuring sky brightness and doing public programs and whatever else. If we can get them to come to the park and hear about light pollution, they're going to go back and talk with their legislators. They're going to start being more familiar with that. And whenever we need something done, like legislation, they're going to be there for us, or they're even going to advocate themselves. One of the problems was that IDA is getting overwhelmed with these applications for dark sky parks and urban night sky places. And so we were able to work with IDA to help streamline the process to where we can do this a little faster for urban night sky places. So that means that we have the potential to go out and go after lots of cities and get them to basically become an urban night sky place. And so to that point, we said, well, if we're going to go out and start soliciting lots of cities, we only have a board of 12 and we have only so many members. We need to find someone to work with us. How do we get people in, for example, in zone 5 or in zone 4 to go talk with parks? I mean, I can't physically get from St. Louis and just drive to every city in the state, but guess what? There's Missouri Master Naturalists, there's Audubon Society, there's astronomers, there's conservation partners out there. And so if they might know what they know about maybe nature in the day, they might even know a little bit about nature in the night, but they may not be able to connect that to how light pollution is impacting nature at day, or rather at night. So let's put together a training program and train them how to talk about light pollution. So we put together a 4-hour program in 2 parts. The first part was about an hour and a half, 2 hours on the International Dark Sky Program. In other words, describing what that means even, and the science of light pollution. That was done by an instructor, Dr. Vayugolki, and he was out of Truman State University. He's the one that's running our sky measurement program, so he knows that pretty well. And he talked about really that part of it. The second part was really about life on Earth, and that's by a behavioral ecologist, Dr. Brett Seymour. And he did a great job. He's already given lots of lectures on birds and insects and animals and how you see, and even human health, those type of things. So he's got a really good handle on that part of it. So when you put together the science and then the impact, which is the part 2, that starts really building some knowledge that these master naturalists and these others can go out and talk with state parks and Missouri county parks and city parks about what's going on. And we're actually having some pretty good success so far. I just got a request yesterday for someone, they're making a presentation and they wanted PowerPoints to go talk with, and I think they're in zone 5 up there. So that's kind of the step where when we're small, we have to find smart ways to make things happen. We've also put together some brochures.
Hang on, Don.
Yes.
Let me stop here. Hey, Scott, are there any comments or questions thus far? You're muted.
Yep, let's take a look. We have Tarek in the UAE says he was driving in his city and he thinks he was moving between Bortle 7, 8, and 9. I didn't see much difference really.
There's really not, unless you stop and, find specific constellations and count how many stars you can see, like the Great Square of Pegasus or Inner Belt of Orion. And there's different ways to measure that and quantify it. So without stopping and doing some technical work, it's difficult to notice any difference really between 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah, and a good place to go for that would be to go to Globe at Night. There's a website that'll talk about how to understand the differences between the different Bortle scales, or basically different light pollution levels. Okay.
Michael Florian, he says, I'm an astronomer in Arizona, and this state won't enforce light pollution laws.
What state? Arizona?
Arizona.
Yeah,
I think they do in Tucson. But at least I've heard that it's pretty strong. Maybe where you are, it could be improved. I don't know. What would you suggest?
you're talking about me.
Yes.
So the challenge is always that you can put all the laws you want in the world, but until you start enforcing that, and I've had some conversations with some folks out of Arizona. Cities actually have to train people to go out and actually measure what's going on and to be able to have the authority to enforce things. And a lot of times the public, it might be light glare or light trespass, they'll complain and there's some legitimate things to do, but often it just happens and nobody complains, but they're still not following the letter of the law. It's a challenge with every city. Quite truthfully, my experience so far is that a lot of cities don't really know that much about all this stuff. They basically know that bright lights, in their opinion, are safer and better. And so, when you get enforcement people, they have to be trained to really look at this and know what to look for and to really make it really happen.
And the problem becomes the government we've had this conversation previously, the government doesn't want to enforce something that they can't measure. And a lot of times, light pollution becomes an anecdotal thing for many people. And it's hard to sit there and go, oh, it creates 3.7 Gindel flecks of glare. I made up that term, Gindel fleck, by the way. I don't even know if glare has a measurement or not. But if they can't measure it, then they can't enforce it because they'll go to court and say, well, it's arbitrary and capricious. And boom, you lose. And so I think that's oftentimes the hesitancy to enforce.
Yeah, I think the measurement is probably getting a little bit easier with some of the tools out there. I think the bigger issue to me is whether or not it's necessary or not. In other words, one of the principles of light pollution, of lighting, is whether or not it's necessary. Sometimes you could argue it's necessary for safety, and sometimes you would argue it's not necessary for safety. But that could be somewhat of subjective. In other words, if you're just absolutely sure that you got to have the brightest lights in the world to be safe, then you're going to argue that all day. So it gets to sometimes the statistics are a little murky about whether something's needed or not. But measurement, I think, is getting easier to do with some of the tools, although some of the spectrums I don't think they can still have, let's say, for example, the color temperature isn't the whole story. There's a lot of other things there.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else, Scott?
Let's look at some more here. Texas Backyard Astronomy in Glen Rose, Texas says, I wish Governor Abbott was committed to reducing light pollution. I'm not sure if he's ever spoken about the problem.
In most instances, I think that observation is pretty correct. Governors, unless you personally know the governor and have a conversation with him, it's not something that will ever get on his radar screen without a serious amount of work. Don, you concur?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I've concluded. Quite truthfully, one of the obstacles that I've faced in Missouri right off, you start with the fact that we only had 6 members in the entire state of IDA, okay? People don't even know what we're talking about. They go like, wow, I never even thought about light and being a polluter. I mean, what are you even talking about? So here's the thing, is that if you're a state legislator or governor and you've never heard anybody talk to you about or complain about it, what are you going to do? Is that going to be your hot topic to follow up? I don't think so.
No.
So the idea that we're trying to go after is say, look, we start talking with cities and parks and lots of public, and they start realizing that there's a lot of bad things going on. The glares in their face, there's light trespass, it's getting brighter, and they start looking around and realize this, and they start complaining to the legislators. They in turn start hearing lots of people doing this. Guess what? Then you're going to have some attention. And here's the other side of this. This is an important one, is that I think that a lot of time we look at this as taking away our right to do something. In other words, we're controlling you, telling you what you have to do with your lights. But the flip side of that is that the people are losing the heritage of what the right is that they should have. They should be able to see the
Right.
right. And so if you don't really frame it correctly, instead of saying I'm taking it away, you're really giving them back what's rightfully theirs.
And I've had the conversation with people, they said, well, you shouldn't regulate that. And I said, well, do you think we need an electric code? And they'll say, yes. Do we need a national building code? Well, yes. Do we need a national plumbing code? Well, yes. Well, okay. Well, what's the difference? We regulate that. They'll try that regulation argument, and I'll bring that up, and immediately they're totally agree that we need that regulation. So, you don't want to do it, make people mad, because that doesn't help.
And
make
equally,
them mad if they're an enemy.
Yeah, and equally, if they were to play a band right next to their house, and they would play it all night till 2:00 in the morning, they would be very upset about that, right?
I use that all the time. The policeman is going to show up and make me turn my music down, but yet you can shine bright spotlights into my backyard and bedroom, and the police will tell me to quit calling them, because what are you worried about? It keeps the criminals out. So
that's right.
So,
that's right.
But you're on a time schedule here, so let's keep moving so we can get through this.
Yeah, I actually don't have that many more slides, because I did want to leave time. So one of the things that we did is, not only are we working on urban night sky place, in other words, trying to recruit parks to adopt this program and do some nighttime stuff, we went directly to the cities. We actually worked with the astronomy societies throughout the state to raise some money, and we attended a conference that has all the cities in our state attend once a year. And we spoke with lots of cities about this. And I will tell you that when they walked by, it wasn't like they just picked up a brochure and left. They actually spent some time with us. That encourages me that there's a lot of interest in learning about how light, for example, street lighting, and how safety and energy savings and all that can be done. I'm convinced that a lot of towns in many small rural areas they have not converted their street lights. They have not done a lot of things. And so they're on the verge. And unless we can get ahead of it, like the wave, if you will, once you get them to change it and they don't do it right, then it's going to be tough to change it some other direction. So I think there's many challenges that we have as a state, and I think it's a start. I feel like we've got a lot of things going here, but I think in general, in the mid part of the country, they just don't know much about it. And I will say in general, and this was a big surprise to me when I started with IDA, it turns out the US is not very far ahead on this thing. Europe is much further into the details of what's going on. In fact, I was getting frustrated every time I tried to find a study. It was from Europe somewhere, United Kingdom or Germany or whatever else. And when I talk, one of our IDA board members is a behavioral ecologist. He tells me there's almost nobody like him in the US. When you want to know how nature is impacted by this, who do you talk to? And the skill sets are just not really that deep. And it's a little bit frustrating, but I am feeling that we're making a little bit of progress. So there are some things that you can do. Obviously, just join IDA. That'd be great. There are a lot of great park programs, whether you have a decision about your local park to take on an urban night sky place program. It's easy enough to do. There's lots of material. You could probably get a master naturalist or somebody in your state. It's a conversation group. Cities, if you don't talk to them about their lighting and ordinances, they'll never think about it. Conservation groups, I found all of them willing to talk to me very quickly. They get it really quickly, like birds and insects and rivers and all that kind of stuff. They get very quickly how this can be impacting. And businesses, if they could turn off their lights during critical parts of the year, it's a start, right? And it's really not that hard to do. Lights Out Heartland involves multiple states, and they can register their building, or they can, if it's a conservation group, they can join and become part of our conservation monthly programs. And you can even do things at home. You can do a lighting home assessment and just talk with the public. There's a lot of things when you talk to your neighbors about when you start realizing it's there. The main thing is just volunteer. Just start making some conversations to raise it up. You'll get a first a puzzle look. And I'm almost sure that it won't be very long that somebody's going to come up with, oh, I remember the Milky Way when I was young. I remember how that used to be and how I could see the stars. And I hate my neighbor's lights in my face, or I hate those bright white LED lights when I'm driving down the road that aren't bright that I can't see anything. You'll get those very quickly, but you got to be able to move that, from a great discussion into some kind of actions. So that's really all I had as far as what I wanted to talk about. And I don't know if there's questions or not, but
Yeah, there's a question here from Cyprus. George Trulius is asking, were the local authorities in Missouri using the appropriate street lights to protect the night sky?
well, first off, I say a lot of these street lights in Missouri are old school. In other words, they haven't been changed. And so the challenge that we've had is that these, like, for example, the city of Kansas City, which is a major metropolitan area in our state, they have something like 90,000 street lights that need to be converted. What they're doing is they're reaching back to 5 years ago or something and pulling up some kind of statistic that's wrong, or maybe it's changed substantially, and they're using that as a basis to put on really bright lights or some inappropriate lights. They're just not necessarily understanding, because everything's moving so quickly, the technology, that they're not really kind of keeping up. For example, you can get motion detectors now that are good. You can actually dial down the lighting so that the lighting will stay consistent over the life of the bulb, so it's a consistent level of lighting. They just don't really quite, and frankly, it's hard work sometimes to be able to get this lighting to think differently about it whenever you start trying to put in new codes, and you've got a lot of people that you're trying to explain how it really works, and it's fairly complex in some ways.
Because when you say end light pollution, people here get rid of all the lights. And and you convince one person, but then you got to convince the entire planning department staff. And then you've got to convince the mayor. And then you got to convince the city council. And then you got to convince all the city council's constituents. And, you know, it's a challenge to get things like that done.
Yeah, it's a fairly complex thing. And one of the things that I was recently talking with a lighting expert, they said what happens is that it's like everything else. You tend to go out and get the cheapest bidder, you know, and you want bright lights because that's what everybody wants. That's the easy way. And then when you find out when you put them in that the people don't like the bright lights, they're very annoyed by them, and that the cheap lights, when they get replaced, they go out quicker. And it turns out that your ongoing cost of maintenance is high. And so you put all it together, and it's not really the best deal at all. It's just you thought it was the best deal. And by the way, it turns out that with the LED lighting, and by the way, we're never saying that you need to not have lights. We're saying just use them appropriately. But whenever you get into bright lights or different colored lights, the cost is not that much different. So you can do the right thing and it save you about the same amount of money. And you just have to really be aware of what you're really doing. And it's got to come from the public wanting and demanding good lighting. That's what it's got to come down to.
You know, I say it's about the right amount of light in the right color at the right time.
That's right.
That's all this is about.
We've learned also by talking to others that have given presentations here that there's smart lighting that's being employed. And that would allow the lights to come on when they need to be on, you know, maybe even with like a motion sensor, and turn off when they're not being used. There are some grocery stores now. I was recently in a Target store, went into the grocery section, and as I approached the freezer section, the freezer lights all turned on, you know, while I was there, so I could see what the product was, and it turned off. You know, that's great. Down lighting that is in parking lots in those grocery stores has helped out a lot. Walmart has started to employ some of that here, which is cool. So there's certainly answers. You know, I've always thought that the lights, you know, for driving on the road should be not up high, but really almost below the or at the door line of your car, you know, so you can see the road. Okay. I don't care about seeing everything else. I just want to see the road as I'm driving it. But, you know, and that's so that I can see other traffic. It's not to see where my car is going. Right. So,
you know, Scott, you raised the issue of, you know, parking lot lights. And, you know, I know there are we're seeing a lot of, I guess it would be organic progress with companies that build shopping centers are going to much better lower lighting, full cutoff shields and things like that. And, you know, Tucson has instituted a smart lighting grid in the whole city where they can turn off and turn down any light at any given time. So if there's going to be a parade down the street at night, they can turn all the lights on bright. And if there's no traffic, they can turn them off except at intersections And like, as it gets later and later, like at 11 o'clock, they dim down 50%. And then like at 1 o'clock, they go down to 25%. And then they come back up as more and more people are on the street. And, I think that's probably the future.
I think it should be, actually. If you think about it, I come from business, and we always wanted to be, working smart. And if I was a government official, I would certainly hate to waste money, when I didn't need to. So if you think about it, and you don't even really think about it until you start understanding how all this really works, and you start looking around. So if you drive in the middle of the night and you see this empty parking lot completely lit up with nobody on it, right? You say, why are the lights on? Why are the lights on to start with? What's the point of that, really?
Car lots.
Yeah, and you go to buildings, and you look at buildings that are high rises, and every light in the entire building is on. Maybe the maintenance person might walk in there or not, but think about that's probably killing birds, right?
It's vanity lighting. Is what that is. I think it's vanity lighting.
But honestly, I think sometimes they just don't think about it. They go home and they don't think about the lights being on. They come back in the morning, and the dead birds are already picked up because the people have already cleaned up the sidewalk. Often people just don't think about what they're doing. They just turn on lights, and they're bright, and they just walk away, and that's it. They go inside, close their blinds, and they're done, right?
There's a woman that in New York City, we had pictures on at one point, that every morning before the traffic starts, she walks the perimeter of World Trade Center 7, I think, and collects and documents every single bird that she can pick up off the sidewalk. And she says there's significantly more birds on rooftops and in inaccessible areas she can't get to.
Oh yeah.
But it's literally hundreds of birds during the migration. But even every day of the year, there's dead birds on the ground outside of that building, and you apply that to, say, St. Louis. And I don't know any tall buildings in St. Louis, but there's significant, and St. Louis doesn't have a huge towering downtown skyscraper scene like New York and Chicago does, right?
Yeah, that's correct. But they do have a program called Bird Safe that's going on in St. Louis and Kansas City. They literally walk around and pick up dead birds, and they count them, and they decide, sometimes it's not just light pollution, but it's reflective glass. It's the way that the particular building is set up to where it traps the birds. They can't get out. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but there's no question there's a lot of dead birds, and what they're doing is working with buildings to register to turn off their lights, and also to make changes so that birds won't just fly into glass, for example.
Right. All right, you've got to get, if you're you've got to go to give another presentation.
Yes,
Don,
I do.
thank you. We could talk forever on this subject.
Yeah, Scott, good to see you guys. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Enjoyed being on. Good to see you too.
We appreciate it. Thanks. Be careful.
We'll hope to see you again some other time. Don.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks for presenting here.
Yeah, thank you.
Lots of great ideas for coalition building, and ideas for all of us to try and to embrace and perpetuate forward. Good job. Right. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a great evening.
Yeah, before we wrap this up, Ken, I mean, there were a few more comments here. Pekka in Stockholm is saying that in Sweden, I think the issue is that light pollution is for the government a gray zone. So they don't want to stick their stake in the fire, I can understand where it's a political kind of thing. Really, to me, as we've been kind of focused on this for the last few weeks, it is really one of education,
Clearly.
Blue light is awful for you. Okay. The health effects on people is no other way to put it but bad. It reduces your ability to sleep. It increases chance of heart attack, stroke, and cancer. There's just really nothing good about it. Warm light is certainly better, but putting light where it needs to go and using the light when you need to use it, okay, is certainly all something we've been talking about again and again on this program. But governments don't get it, and it really does take someone to actually dig in and start contacting their local officials, their government officials. That's some of the stuff that Pekka did in Stockholm, and he was able to actually get some changes made locally for himself in his own neighborhood, and was able to get a voice in his own community, which is very cool. So a lot of times, most of the time, to make a big change really takes one person that's going to follow it through. So George in Cyprus is saying, because the LED lamps create lots of heat, they also remove the plastic covers of the street lamps so that they won't, the heat won't get start a fire, I guess. And this makes the light escape upwards, destroying the sky view, which is absolutely true. George, I would recommend, if you haven't already done this, to contact the IDA. They're at darkskies.org, and to add to your arsenal of things that you can use to communicate to officials, and to find a strategy that might work for you, because as we destroy the night sky, we all lose. It's not a win for everyone. It doesn't keep people safer. It doesn't reduce crime. There's and you have to look at this as a scientist would, not as what makes somebody feel good. Okay, so that's the deal. And I think that's about it. Let's see.
I've discovered and I've learned, I always thought, okay, you just put a shield up, right? Just build a piece of aluminum and, get some sheet metal and make a shield and stick it up there. But
that's what Pekka was doing. You remember, he was shielding off his patio so he could do astronomy from.
But that was a temporary solution that worked. Yeah. But long term, it creates heat buildup, and I'm sure it'll void the warranty of the light if the city owns it. So, and in fact, Scott and I have started discussions on what we can do here, on our building, because,
right.
Think globally, but act locally. What can we do here on our building, which has terrible lights, to deal with the light pollution that we create? And we're going to work on that, and we're going to come up with some solution. But, going to a tin shop and have a tin tapper make us a shield we just stick on there. I don't want to burn our building down. It causes heat buildup, and who knows what goes on it. Right. So there's more to it than what my simplistic mind thought at the time, is just simply build a shield. But there's heat buildup from those circuit boards in there that if you're not careful, you're going to create a heat problem. So
right, your building burns down and then insurance won't cover it.
Right, because exactly. So
you did what to your lights?
You did what? Yeah,
that's right. So you need to go replace the lights with fixtures that are going to do the job and do it correctly. One of the things I would also recommend is that unless you're a major observatory, okay, that you don't use the reason of destroying the night sky for astronomers. Okay. Right. Frankly, most politicians could, care less about astronomy and science in general. If you just look at the U.S. budget, okay, on what's spent on science, okay, it's definitely in the single digits, in the low single digits, okay, compared to other budgets that our country spends that money on. So when it comes down to that, I would say that the thing to work on is wellness for human beings. Okay, we humans tend to be very centric about themselves, and while some of us are concerned about our environment, which is also a very centrist view, because without the environment, we don't get to live here on planet Earth. Okay, so and we don't get to create it someplace else, so we got to do it here. So I would focus. The argument would be about health issues of what lights do to people. Okay, their mental, their state of mind, their health, and also what it does for their, natural environment. You'll find if you go to, high-end neighborhoods, you don't see them lit up like crazy. Okay. They have subdued lighting in them. The homes are, the more expensive homes are there, and they don't have lights aimed everywhere. It doesn't look like lighting that you might see in a schoolyard or a prison. Okay.
I was going to say prison, exactly.
Right.
It's a prison.
But sometimes in the less expensive areas, okay, the people will put up bright lights, and they think that this is going to stop crime somehow. Okay. But someone pointed out in chat that, look, the criminals party all night, okay, until the early morning hours. And then when everybody's at work, that's when they do their crime. Okay. So, right. Much
There's more
easier to
crime.
go break into a home when no one's there.
More crime in the daytime than there is at night. You have less chance of getting caught and shot.
Yes, that's right. So anyways, I think that kind of concludes this. Kent, what are you thinking for your next FirstLight Chronicles?
I don't know. I don't want to say we've beat a dead horse, but we've talked about this subject for a while, and I think maybe take a break on it. Those of you out there, if you've got a subject you want me to talk about and research, email me at explorealliance@explorescientific.com. Scott's going to put it in the chat, I think. Email me your idea for some future shows, and I'll find an expert and we'll go talk about that subject.
Yep.
So I'd like to evolve this into, our viewers show. Hey, I said it right. I didn't say readers. Our viewers show. It's the first time I've done it right. The first time. Evolve this into a really viewer-driven show. You're the people who make the show. What do you want to talk about? I don't want to get into a lot of deep astrophotography because we have an astrophotography show on Fridays. What troubles are you having?
That's right. How to get started in astronomy, how to maybe create your own astronomy club,
Our Sky chapter.
Yeah. Best viewing, techniques, that kind of thing. So
while we were sitting here talking, I downloaded the International Dark Sky Association's guidance on how to create a urban sky park. Sugar Creek Astronomical Society goes out and has been doing a program for more than 12 or 15 years.
Mhm.
And out at Hobbs State Park, and I'm going to start that program. I know they'll go for it. I'm going to contact them, and I'm going to pursue that for the Hobbs State Park. It's Bortle 3 or 4 probably. It will not qualify for a dark site park. No way, no how. But raising that designation most assuredly creates some awareness. And so I've downloaded that, and I'm going to be reading it and start working on the application and, do what I can here locally. That's real easy for everybody else to do. It takes some legwork of measuring sky brightness, doing an assessment of every light in the park, things like that. And frankly, this park, actually in the park, doesn't have very many lights because it's all woods. There's one or two roads go through it. And so it's going to be a fairly easy thing for us to do that kind of counting. So anyway, that's an idea for everybody else to start in on as well, to make that happen.
Okay. You're right. Okay, so later tonight, starting at 7 p.m., Dr. Caitlin Ahrens will have her final presentation on 7 months of science. You're not going to want to miss it. The subject is exoplanets, and she's bringing in a exoplanet scientist that will discuss this with us, and I think you'll find it fascinating. So,
Scott, and people talking about Catherine, her doctorate. I don't know if she
Caitlin?
ever. Caitlin. Oh no, you're talking about Caitlin Aaron's. I heard
Yes.
Catherine Auld. Okay,
No.
Caitlin Aaron. Yeah, I heard a different name completely. Yeah, Caitlin is fantastic. She does the radio broadcast. She has a podcast. She is just fantastic. She's just
she
a great
is.
speaker. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, wonderful. Okay, so we'll see you guys in about 2 hours. Okay, and until that time, keep looking up.